You sit around and you think about.
Welcome to State of the Art Southern Illinois, a podcast by the Marion Cultural and Civic Center. Today, our guest is Roger Earl, founding member of Foghat. Listen as we discuss his musical inspirations, what it was like in his household musically growing up, and how his career progressed and took off. It was a wonderful conversation. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, Josh.
Hi, Roger. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I'm out here. I'm at home at the moment, out here on Long Island, east of Torquay near Port Jefferson on the North Shore. It's a piece of heaven on earth out here. It's actually, when I got off the boat in 1972, this is where I landed, and I met some people here, and they were very friendly, so I decided to stay.
Wonderful. And I mean, you've got fishing right out your back door. You've got everything you need, it sounds like.
Yeah, I live just off of Long Island Sound. Striped bass, bluefish, fluke, which are a big, large flounder. I hooked one the other day. Got it right into the boat, and the hook pulled out. I think it had to be at least 8 pounds. I mean, I think they call them doormats. But never mind. He'll live for another day. I would have bashed him in the head and eaten him. Oh. But yeah, I'm an avid fisherman, so this is fine. I've been fishing since I was about 5 or 6 years old. I think my father first took me. I learned to fly fish when I was 7. I couldn't afford. I was growing up in southwest London, and there wasn't much trout fishing around there, but my parents used to take me on holiday into Devon and Cornwall and to Wales, where there was some really good trout fishing. So, but I couldn't afford the license. I don't know why you have to have a license when you're 8 years old, but never mind. So I would poach, but that was. But I used to fish for sea trout, which are sea-run brown trout, and they feed at night. When they get into the rivers, they feed, unlike Atlantic salmon. So when the bailiff would come along, he'd have his flashlight, and back then I could run. But I always get a license now. Support your fishing.
So you grew up in South London.
Yeah.
And was there a lot of music in your household? Did you grow up with, what musical influence did you grow up with?
My father played piano. He worked at Aston Martin's at their original factory in Feltham. He was a panel fitter. He'd fit, like doors and dashboards and stuff like that. So there was always pretty exotic cars outside when I was growing up. Dad played piano, somewhat in the style of Fats Waller, sort of like rather heavy-handed, left hand. He could sing, and Mum could sing too. There was always music in the house. We had a record player ever since I can remember. We used to have a Grundy tape recorder, and we'd tape stuff off of the radio. Actually,
what kind of things were you taping off the radio back then?
There would be live stuff on the BBC. There would be sort of like American musicians that would come over, and the BBC would be doing a special. So we'd attach these things to the speakers on the back, and I don't know about the quality, but it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Well, there was obviously a care about music and a love of music there to go to those efforts.
Yeah, well, Dad being a piano player, I think I was about 10 or 11. Jerry Lee Lewis had just released his first single. I can't remember if it was Great Balls of Fire or Whole Lot of Shaking Going On, but the B-side was Mean Woman Blues. And he brought the single home, and he said, "Yeah, have it to this boy, son. He can really play the Joanna." And I said, "Okay," but I remember him talking about the B-side, That was Mean Woman Blues, and about 6 months later or so, Jerry Lee came over to England and was touring, and Dad took me to see him. And as my mother used to put it, he was never the same since. It addled his brain, that rock and roll. Actually, my mum was a huge music fan. She actually had a really good voice too. There was always music in the house, not always music that I appreciated, I don't think, but it was... I had my parents were really cool. They weren't horrible. I was the horrible one. I think you don't really upset your mum and dad, especially your mum. You haven't really grown up properly, have you?
No. No.
Actually, I love my mum. She was a wonderful soul. Was very bright, and yeah, she was something else.
So that was the start of your like passion towards rock and roll.
Yeah. So I went to see Jerry Lee Lewis. My older brother Colin was starting to learn to play piano. He was a Jerry Lee Lewis fan. Little Richard was big in our house. Also, Johny Cash, my older brother. Even though Johny Cash didn't have a piano player in his band, didn't have a drummer either back then on the Sun record label, and but I was probably the only 12 or 13-year-old riding my bike to school in southwest London, singing Johnny Cash songs. She loves you, Big River, more than me. Ooh. And I never got to see Johnny Cash live, but his music transcends time as far as I'm concerned. The stories, simple stories, straight ahead. But
and he always had such a clear voice as to who he was. His last album with Rick Rubin was just spectacular with the songs that were picked and just his voice completely changed what those songs were and what we knew them as and brought a different clarity to it and a different vision to it in a beautiful way.
He was a real poet as far as I'm concerned. I've seen a number of his TV shows and stuff, and I think it was fascinating for somebody because his taste in music, Bob Dylan. He would have all sorts of people on it, on his shows, which I thought was really cool. I would have loved to have met him, but I went to his what do they call it? Museum in Memphis. Nashville, and I got the T-shirt, had a picture taken with him. And then of course I discovered Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker, stuff like that. Especially Muddy Waters. It was 1961. He did a live album called the Newport Jazz Festival, and he had his band, and it was, I think, even to this day, it's one of the most incredible live records ever. If anybody out there wants to hear some real American music, Muddy Waters live at Newport, it moved me, and it was really that record that I think made me want to play. I couldn't play like the drummer. Who was the drummer on that record? Muddy had 2 or 3 different drummers. And it wasn't Sam Lay. Francis Clay. He was an incredible drummer. A lot of drummers that played like in blues bands back then were jazz drummers. But I guess they had to earn a living somehow. And when Muddy turned to the electric guitar, he was. I got to play with Muddy 1977. Met him a couple of times. Beautiful man.
It sounds like that was kind of a long-time musical dream come true there.
Yeah, it was. 1977, Foghat did a tribute to the blues at the New York Palladium. And it was my father's 60th birthday. And I brought Mum and Dad over because I had... we were all doing very well. Actually, my wife says if I had a dime, I'd have more money than sense, but that's another story. Anyway, Mum and Dad come over, and we're backstage. There was John Lee Hooker. We were basically the house band. We're backing John Lee Hooker, Muddy, Paul Butterfield, Eddie Bluesman Kirkland, Johnny Winter. And so we're backstage, and I introduce Mum to Muddy Waters, and I say, Mum, Dad, this is Mr. Muddy Waters. Mr. Waters, Mum and Dad. And there's the youngest hanging out with his musical heroes. Muddy was a beautiful man. He really was. The way he conducted himself, that he was like just a really genuine person. And I heard some stories also about the people who actually were in his band and stuff. He used to treat them really well. Yeah, he was a hero of mine. Him and a number of other sort of great bluesmen. This is a land of music. Jazz, blues, rock and roll, gospel. This is where it all comes from. Probably, the original sort of folks that came here from Africa and also from Europe. Europe would, like a lot of the folk sort of melodies and stuff. And of course, the folks that came from Africa brought their rhythms and songs. And my brother used to say, anything other than 3 chords, you have to view with a certain amount of suspicion. So, yeah, I'm a rock and roller.
So when did you get your start musically? When did you pick up drums specifically?
Actually, it was after I saw Jerry Lee, and I actually started playing piano. But I don't know, it was a little bit confusing for me. Well, actually, the piano is a percussive instrument anyway. But my older brother was playing piano, learning to play, and Dad played, so it didn't seem like a good idea having 3 piano players in the family. So I said to my dad, I'd work 3 days after school, and on Saturday mornings I worked in a bakery, so I had my own money, but we weren't sort of well off or anything. But I was saving my own money. I said, Dad, I want to get a motorbike. And he said, well, I'm not helping you with that, son. And I said, well, you had one. But he wasn't 13. I don't know what I thought I was going to do with a motorbike at 13. But anyway, and I said, well, I want to get a drum kit. And he said, okay, well, he had a friend that he worked with who was a drum teacher. Actually, he was really quite famous. He played with a number of jazz musicians that came over from the States and played in England, and also a number of drummers actually went to him for lessons. His name was Chris Hewitt. I think I started when I was 12 or 13, somewhere around there. Once a week I would go there, and I would have my Henry Adler book of snare drum rudiments, Buddy Rich's snare drum rudiments. So I was do that for about a couple of years, and then just before at my 15th birthday, I'd saved up a bunch of money, and my teacher said, you can get a drum kit. I mean, so Dad signed on the dotted line. I put half the money down, and I bought it. But yeah, that was it. Musicians are, I think, inherently selfish. We really don't care about anything other than playing.
Mm-hmm.
Probably why, so many musicians have got screwed over the years, because we play for free. Will you come and play over here? I've got a gig. Yeah, sure. Are we getting paid? No. All right. What time do you want me there? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's a love of music, it's a real passion, and I think I'm one of the fortunate few in this world who gets to earn a decent living. It's something I love doing, so it's nice to be able to give it back from time to time.
Yeah. And so you started in a band at what age? When did you got a kid at 15, and when did you start playing out with other people?
There's some friends I went to school with in high school. One of my best friends, Dave, we're still good friends, but he lives in England. They had a band ever since they were like 10 or 11 called the Concords. Of course they were that. Then I was when I was about 16 or 17, somewhere around there. My friend Dave, the bass player, knocked on my door and said, "Would you want to join the band?" Because their drummer, he wasn't very good actually. So I got the gig, and Ray Dorset was the lead singer, who I'd known since I was 7 or 8. He went on to be the lead singer in Mungo Jerry. My brother Colin went on to play piano in the band Mungo Jerry. In the summertime, ba-da-da-da-da.
Mm-hmm.
No, stop singing, Roger.
You keep it up. You go for it.
No, we don't want to do that. And it was myself, Dave, and Ray Dorset, and we were then called the Tramps. And then
what kind of were you doing rock and roll music from the beginning with that?
Yeah, but blues, rock and roll, country blues, rock and roll. Yeah, that's what we played. Ray was writing some original music, and we did a couple of demos and stuff, but nothing was really happening. And we were just a trio, and I was working as a commercial artist up in London. That's how I paid for my cymbals and drums. Things sort of slowed down a bit. There was at the time, apparently trios weren't sort of very popular. Everybody wanted to have like horn sections, so we weren't getting too many dates. Anyway, I was always looking for to earn a living playing, and I auditioned for Savoy Brown. I didn't get the first audition. Somebody else, I think Bill Bruford, got the first job, and then he left or whatever, like a month or so later. And it was actually, I have to thank Lonesome Dave for it, because I auditioned the first time, but I didn't get the job. And then they called me back about a month later because we had the same agency as Savoy Brown, and Lonesome Dave is quoted as saying, "Why don't you give that bloke who had the Image a chance again?" So I went back to the Nag's Head in Battersea. There's a pub upstairs. I borrowed my dad's car, dragged the drums up the stairs. I played for about 2 or 3 hours, I think. Then I started packing the drums up, and they said, where are you going? I said, I've got a day gig. I'm going back to work. They said, well, we've got a gig in Birmingham tonight. That was it. But
so that's a pretty quick hire.
Yeah, I didn't get paid for a while though, so I had to hang on to typical blues band. It sounds funny now, but the manager is Harry. He was Welsh, and I did the first week. I did about 3 or 4 dates, and we were doing about 3 or 4 dates a week. We were going to Newcastle, Birmingham, Manchester, and I had a day job as a commercial artist, and so I get back to London about 4 or 5 in the morning, looking like somebody the cat dragged in. So of course I started turning up late to work, and I said, well, the bus was late. They said, so where did you play last night, Rog? Busted.
So you're saying that you were doing commercial as a commercial artist. Exactly what did that entail?
I would do industrial design. I would actually do the artwork for the printer. Actually, I started working as a commercial artist when I was 15. I left home when I was 15 because London was the place to be. I wanted to go and see bands. My mum wouldn't give me a front door key. It was probably wise, but so I moved into a flat nearer London, but that brings back some memories. Okay, well, I'm sorry. What was the question again?
So you were talking about the work you were doing as a commercial artist, but you essentially got a drum kit and left the house and moved to London.
Yeah, commercial art was great. I was good at what I did, and I managed to sort of hold it together.
And by today's standards, you were basically a graphic designer.
When I joined Savoy Brown, I was about 20, I guess. That's when it got difficult because we were traveling all over the country, and I was turning up late and not turning up at all sometimes. They were very kind, but after about 6 or 7 weeks, I think I had handed in my notice, but I still hadn't been paid. And I would go into the our manager's office and say, Harry, I haven't got paid yet. I've been in the band 2 weeks. You haven't got paid, Boyle? Oh, well, we'll see about that then. So another 2 weeks would go by, and I'd say, Harry, I haven't been paid yet. And we've done like dozen or so gigs. You haven't got paid, Boyle? Oh, we'll see about this. Went on for about 6 or 7 weeks. I don't know if I ever got paid anyway, but eventually they started paying me £12.50 a week. I gave up my day job, which was considerably more than maybe close to like £150 a week. I was doing overtime and stuff like that and freelance work. So typical musician, gave it all up. No regrets.
Yeah. So you were with Savoy Brown.
Yeah.
And then you left Savoy Brown with a couple other members of the band to start Foghat. Is that right?
Yeah. Myself and Lonesome Dave left Savoy Brown. We left actually, and it was quite amicable. I'm still very good friends with Kim Simmons. It was just time for a change. I think Tony Stevens got fired. He was a bass player. No, he was a good bass player though. So we left. Then we had to find another guitar player. So we auditioned and we met Rob Price, who was absolutely fantastic. And but we couldn't get any work in England. Our ex-manager basically blackballed us. He managed Savoy Brown and Chicken Shack, which were two of the largest bands in England at the time. We'd already toured the States as well with Savoy Brown and were doing well. But we couldn't really get any work. We did a 3-week tour with Captain Beefheart that somebody who worked with Warner Brothers, which was the parent company of Bearsville Records, got us some dates. And then our first album was released in the States, and we started getting some noise. And we booked our first tour over here. We actually had to play for free the first date in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. It was a festival in the park. That was our first date. But we hadn't got our, I think it's an H2 visa you have to get. They hadn't come through. We'd applied for them. They were supposed to be here. But anyway, we played in the park for free anyway. But typical people of the Midwest, as soon as we got our visas, they sent us our money.
Mm-hmm.
They say that those people in the Midwest are the very best.
I'd have to agree with that.
Yeah. There's a song in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's already done it, I'm sure.
So Oshkosh, Wisconsin was your big start in the U.S.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to tell a friend of mine that he runs the Grand Theater in Oshkosh.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'll need to put a bug in his ear that was your first U.S. gig for Foghat.
It was. We played in the park. It was put on by the city. $1,300, I think we would get it. We got paid.
Yeah.
Eventually, but they sent us some money. We actually the first tour we toured here. It seemed like a year, and we played anywhere and everywhere. Bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, for free. Got paid for some gigs. All we did was tour, and the record company that supported the tour. Well, actually, it was our royalties that supported the tour, so we didn't really get any money. But it worked, It was, and actually playing back then was a lot of fun. It was great. We were tired, but there again, we were young.
And back then, what was you had recorded an album before you toured the U.S.?
Yes, right. Then,
and what was that? What was that songwriting and recording process like back then?
Our first album we recorded Rockfield in Wales. Dave Edmonds produced it for us. Though initially we were just doing it ourselves. Albert Grossman, maybe I should backtrack a little bit. Once we put the band together, we did 6 or 7 songs at Abbey Road Studios. Recorded them. I don't think they actually made it to the first album, but rearranged somewhat. Albert Grossman, who was the manager of Peter, Paul and Mary, Bob Dylan, the band, Janis Joplin. He came over to England, to London with the band, and Todd Rundgren was with him, and we rented a club in North London, in Islington, and in the afternoon, and Albert came down to see us. Our manager at the time convinced him that it would be a good idea for him to come and see us, which he did. It was just him. We set up our Hi-Watts or whatever they were in this smelly, dingy little pub, and we played 6 or 7 songs for Albert Grossman, and when we started playing, he went. We were a rock and roll band. Anyway, I've told this story many times, so I should be able to remember it. Albert used to do this. And he said, so is there anywhere we can get some tea and biscuits? And I said, yeah, there's a hotel across the road. We can get that there. So the band goes over there with their manager. We sit down, and Albert orders tea and biscuits, and we're sitting there, and then the tea and biscuits arrive, or tea and cakes actually, and I start pouring the tea and stuff, and so Albert says, well, hey, let's do it. And that was it. Everybody else in the world, every other major and minor record company turned us down, but Albert heard something that he liked, or maybe he just sort of wanted us on his record label. But so any of you other musicians out there, though the world has sort of changed a lot, you just got to stick at it. He was the only person that saw something in the band. He made lots of money from us, and we did okay too. Thank you, Albert.
And so back then, you guys were recording to tape, right?
Yeah.
And is that versus recording now, where digital is prevalent? What do you see as the value in that process versus the value in digital?
Well, I'm not particularly aware and have great knowledge of all things recording. I know what I like, and I know what I'm doing in the studio to tune drums and moving microphones around. But that's a whole nother league for somebody. But yeah, it's changed the way you record. I mean, back then, well, we had our own studio here in New York around 1979, 1980, somewhere around there. I think we built it. And you know, a Neve board, which was like state-of-the-art board, and we got a second-hand one, was like $1 million. The building that we had, we rented initially, but that was like $100,000. So, whereas now you can get a board maybe for like between, I don't know, $3,000 and $5,000. Microphones are still expensive. You still need good microphones, but the whole world has moved on. I mean, I've just got all my records on CD now, and like apparently CDs are passé. Really? I like CDs. They're like, you know, you can still hold them, and then you get a little package on them, and you can read about what's on there.
Well, I love that we've gone now that streaming has really embraced. There's an underlying movement of vinyl that for people who really want to have something to hold on to and to have that sleeve and to really embrace the music that they love.
It's our first album. It's being re-released.
Nice.
Yeah, I did some liner notes on the back. I jabber away, and
June 17th.
they've got, what is that?
June 17th.
June 17th.
So that will release the day after this podcast airs.
New vinyl, and actually they did a really nice job, like with the artwork, and I told some stories on the back. No porcupines. They've got blue and gold. Ooh.
Very cool.
Color of
And
the sky.
will those be available whenever you play here in Marion at the end of July?
When are they going to be available?
Yeah. Oh, for the show?
Yeah, July
We could
31st.
probably have them available.
Yeah, we
yeah,
could.
definitely.
Yeah,
On the
I can.
31st.
I'll
Yeah.
give it to our merch
Yeah,
person.
for the 31st, yes.
Yeah, the 31st. Yeah, it was when I was asked to do the liner notes for it. It was because everybody else has passed on, but it was nice to actually try and remember some of the stuff that went on there. Dave Edmonds produced it. I booked the time there. Albert Grossman sent us $10,000, and I booked time at Rockfield Studios in Wales, and we had a band house up in the Berkshire Downs where we rehearsed 5 days a week, or 6 days, whatever it was, and then I booked studio time, and we were there. We took the day shift, and which was like midday to like, I don't know, 10 o'clock at night, something like that. And then Dave Edmonds would do the night shift, and of course, you know, things would like cross over. And Dave Edmonds is an absolute genius. The man is just sort of brilliant, plays brilliantly, and we were sort of struggling because we weren't, how can I put it, producers. We could play, and we knew what we liked, and we were pretty good, like with arranging stuff, but we needed somebody to produce. Anyway, we heard some of Dave's stuff, and we're knocked out. And I believe it's our manager said to him, "Look, would you like to produce our record?" And Dave said, "Well, first of all, I got to finish my own record. So when that's done, I'd said this many times, but I know our record wouldn't have been anywhere near as successful as it was. Dave Edmonds can be blamed for that." He's an absolute genius. Yeah, and analog, and he could do all sorts of things. Yeah, an absolute genius.
So, back then with tape, did you have to take a lot more care in the recording process because of how expensive tape was?
Not well. You had to treat it kindly, yeah. I mean, but there again, it was a 24 track. But I remember Dave Edmunds actually taking a razor and like slicing the master 24 track and gluing it together, and doing.
And doing actual physical edits to the tape itself.
Yeah, and Dave listened to the music at ultra volume. I mean, just about anything really sounded good as loud as he had these huge tannoy speakers. Whereas now, like, we mix on like small, like things like this, just to sort of so you can hear. But no, Dave had these huge speakers, and it was a barn that we were living on a farm, and the whole building would shake when he was doing playbacks. He's probably got a hearing problem. I do anyway, but I mean, playing drums in rock and roll bands for a long time. Yeah, your hearing takes a beating, but fortunately they have really good hearing aids these days, so without it I would be numb to the world. But yeah, that was a lot of fun making this record, and yes, as you talked about it, they're re-releasing all sorts of stuff in vinyl now, so look at that.
Yeah, you can grab that on June 17th, and then you can grab it here at the Marion Cultural and Civic Center on July 31st. You look just slightly different in that picture, Roger.
Well, that was 50 years ago. Ah!
So, what would you say once you started touring with that album, and once you were touring America? What's your favorite experience from the road?
I don't think there's any one. Well, there is one that, like I said when I mentioned earlier, that 77 when we did the Foghat's tribute to the blues in 1977, which was filmed and recorded, which Warner Brothers hasn't seen fit to release. I don't know why, but they've got it hidden in their basement somewhere. In fact, I was out there about 4 or 5 years ago, and I suggested that maybe they should let me go down into their basement and see if we could find it. And they said, well, you can't do that. I said, why the fuck not? I mean, this is like, and the recordings were really good, but they don't want you going down and fiddling around. But there had to be at least 5 hours of music. I mean, John Lee Hooker, Muddy Waters, Johnny Winter, Eddie Bluesman Kirkland, Paul Butterfield, and we played with all of them. They had their own bands as well, but then we had a big jam at the end of the evening playing Just Want to Make Love to You with Muddy leading. Yeah, somebody should really get on Warner Brothers' case about that. That would be worth.
That sounds incredible. I mean, you're describing all of the legends of the blues world that were all together in one place.
And I have our front of house engineer, Bob Coffey, a number of years ago put it on CD for me, because he had it on cassettes, a 2-track, and then to cassettes. I don't know what happened to the 2 tracks. Who knows where that is? But I've got it all on CDs, so they're stable. I've listened to them. It's pretty exciting, actually. There's some cool stuff on there. Paul Butterfield was great, and of course Muddy was absolutely wonderful to play with, as was John Lee Hooker. Yeah, it was something else. And Johnny Winter, of course, was fantastic.
And I can't conceive of what what that would be like for you to engage with all of your heroes from growing up, because that's what you were listening to as you were coming up in the industry, and
it was something else. And my parents got to sort of meet some of my heroes, and that was probably a highlight. Though there had probably been numerous highlights, but I always played in great bands. I always played with great musicians, and I think that's, of course, it helps. I mean, when you're playing with people like Rod, Dave, and the current band, Brian Bassett on lead and slide guitar is an incredible player. Scott Holt, who's doing vocals and lead guitar. I mean, he toured with Buddy Guy for 10 years, so we know he can play.
Yeah, and Buddy was just here at the Civic Center last month.
Yeah, I've met Buddy a number of times. What a beautiful man, absolute genius. And of course, Rodney O'Quinn on bass, and he sings a couple of songs as well now. So he toured with Pat Travers for just about ever. Then we saved him from that. So we're actually working on a new album now. We got stuck down in Florida for a few days, and we've got about 7 or 8 songs that we're just sort of fleshing out. I think we may have a week or two off in June. We'll probably get it done by the end of the year. And I just like making new music and creating, and it's not like it used to be when the red light would go on and you go, because it can be stressful in the studio, but where we are now, everybody can really play, and there's no red light. We just play until we've got something that we like, and then do whatever we're doing, or sometimes we just don't press the button at all and just play all day long.
So you'd say that's the advantage of the digital world, is that it's unlimited what you can record and put down without
without worrying about the tape running out, or the cost of tape was expensive. Also, Brian Bassett, our lead and slide guitar player, is also our producer and engineer, and he's engineered and produced numerous artists, still does actually to this day. So we have the resident genius in the band as well. So it's fun. I think we've got about 7 or 8 songs that we're working on. 2 or 3 but they were written by other people. We're doing a Rodney Crowell song.
Oh, wonderful.
He's one of my favorite writers. Talked to him a couple of times. We did one of his songs once before on In the Mood for Something Rude album we did. What did we do? Ain't Living Long Like This.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I talked to Rodney a few years back. Our manager's friendly with his manager, and he said that when he heard that Foghat had recorded one of his songs, quote, "I wore it like a badge of honor." Thank you, Rodney. The man's brilliant.
That's wonderful. Well, I look forward to whenever that album comes out and the new music that you have coming, especially with writers like Rodney Crowell involved, and I mean, all incredible musicians that you're working with and moving forward with. And when you come to Marion, will you be playing? You'll be playing all of the classics that everybody knows. Are you working any of that new material into what you're doing now?
No, we're not going to be doing any material. We've recorded 25 albums over the years, so we have.
You've got a little bit to draw from there.
We've got a lot of material to pick from. There are a couple of songs. A few years back, we did this. We did an album called Earl and the Agitators. Do you have the CD anywhere, Linda?
I have to get one.
And it actually was basically the band that we have now. let's see. We were recording our last studio album, and we were like 2 or 3 songs short, and we weren't we sort of came to a block. So myself and Scott Holt and Brian Bassett were sitting in the studio, and we said, look, we need to come up with like three songs so that our album can be done. But typical musicians, instead of 3, we wrote 17. So this is actually, it's called Earl and the Agitators, Shaken and Stirred, but it's actually what the band is now: Rodney O'Quinn, Scott Holt, Brian Bassett. And we couldn't just leave the songs alone, so we put out a record. There it is.
That's awesome.
Actually, I'm particularly proud of this record. So actually, we should really call it Foghat, shouldn't we? Anyway,
It sounds like it.
The Agitators. And
Will that be available at the merch table in Marion as well?
I don't know. Probably. I'm not in charge of merch. I just bang.
At this point, I don't think you should be in charge of merch.
No. I don't want to do that.
At a certain point in your career, you don't have to throw records at the table anymore. I mean, you reach a certain point.
Actually, because of the COVID nightmare, pre-COVID, we would always go out and sign, so long as it was feasible. I loved meeting the fans. Without them, we'd be out of work. We wouldn't be out. There would be nowhere to play. So, and I'm a music fan. I still am. I'm in awe of the people that I grew up. And I think you can't forget how to be a fan. I mean, that's the reason you play music. That's the reason you're involved in music. Anybody, if that's the reason you do it, because you love music. It's sort of, I don't know. It's life.
What's your favorite thing happening in music right now?
I think the Rolling Stones are a really good band. They'll go a long way.
Yeah, I've heard of them. They're touring, and this guy McCartney, he's been back out on the road.
Yeah, him too. And who's that other drummer? Pretty well known, Ringo.
Yeah, he tours a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, he always puts together a good band. He always puts together a great band, doesn't he?
He does, and I didn't up until recently. That once again talking about Rick Rubin, but there's a documentary out with Rick Rubin and Paul McCartney, and they go through and like dissect some of the tracks and pull out the different parts. I didn't realize how interesting Ringo's drum parts were until hearing them pulled out of the music.
Well, Ringo plays for the song. I mean, we can't all be Buddy Riches and be the lead drummer. Ringo plays for the song. He was fantastic in the Beatles. The way he played, it was musical, his tempo, his feel, and like he did some classic, fills. I mean, Ringo is something. He's a great drummer. The way he played. I mean, if you were a drummer and you tried to sort of dissect what he was doing, it would be. Have you seen the special, the Beatles special?
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Oh, it's incredible, isn't it? And they're all sitting in a room going, "Well, look, do you think you could turn that down a little bit? It's so loud." And they're writing all these great songs. I mean, yeah, bands like that come along. I mean, it's amazing that they stayed together as long as they did, with that much talent. The Beatles, they started it for a lot of people, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
But they always give credit to their musical heroes as well. a lot of the soul musicians, rock and rollers, blues artists as well, then we'd all be out of work if it wasn't for Chuck Berry.
Well, yeah.
Maybe we should do another Chuck Berry song.
Okay.
I don't think anyone would complain about that.
No. Love Chuck.
And that could be another track on your album.
Yeah, it's a quick story about Chuck. It's 1974. We're playing at a festival out in, I think it's San Diego. It was on the West Coast. Jay Gar's band are on, Chuck Berry's on, and we played, and then Chuck Berry is on after us, and myself and Lonesome Dave are huge Chuck Berry fans. So we say to our manager, look, do you think you could go up to Chuck Berry and ask him if we can have a picture taken with him? So he said, yeah, sure. So Chuck finishes his set. He's got his guitar, comes down the steps with his guitar. There's a convertible Cadillac with a rather attractive blonde sitting in there. And he comes down the step, and our manager goes up to him and says, excuse me, Mr. Berry, do you mind if you have a picture with my band? And he says, sure, anytime. Kept walking. The picture is our manager trying to hold on to Chuck's arm. So I never got to meet Chuck, but yeah, there would be people like Chuck Berry. There would probably be no rock and roll. Oh, hold on a second. Somebody would have done it.
Yeah.
No, they did.
I mean, you had Chuck Berry, you had Jerry Lee Lewis, you had...
Yeah.
I mean,
And
all these people that just revolutionized
rock
it.
and rollers long before that. They called it bebop. It was when the jazzers started sort of laying down, a beat as opposed to being... In fact, like I said earlier, most of the blues musicians, the drummers, were jazz musicians anyway. Yeah. Jazz.
Jazz and blues is where it's all started.
Where you had the blues and then you had jazz, so that's where it comes from. Right here in this country, right here, all over. New Orleans, Chicago. Probably even some great music came out of LA. Well, out in the desert anyway, country. Nashville, Memphis. Can you imagine what it was been like? You can't imagine what it was like from a boy from southwest London, going up in London and dreaming of coming to America. Here I am.
And now being a staple of the rock and roll world here.
I'm just like thousands, if not millions of other people around the world who want to come to America, this great land. Needs some work, but I love this place. I love it. Land of music. And I don't think people quite understand that. Even to this day, this country gives music to the world, with R&B and what they call, rap and new music. But the younger generation all over the world are listening to music that comes from this country. I think it's because, in fact, I believe to my soul it's because we have such a diverse society here with musicians and music that came from all over the world, when, 100, 200 years ago. That's what's made American music. It's not, country is related to blues and jazz, and it's this wonderful melting pot of music. And I think this country has given music to the world, and
I agree, and I think all genres today cross over in that way, that the blues and jazz and rock and roll influence is now crossed over into country, and country and pop have kind of merged their way into each other, and there's remnants of folk in modern pop and in modern country now, and it really speaks to what you were saying about it being an overall melting pot together, and all of the musical influences overlapping each other.
Yeah, actually, I read somewhere that Dolly Parton's thinking of doing a rock and roll record. I'll play.
Yeah.
Foghat would be a great backing group. We could back up Dolly. I think she is just magic.
She is.
The amount of songs that woman has written. I mean,
for all genres too.
Oh yeah, I mean, what a voice, and
what a philanthropist. I mean,
yeah,
giving back to the world in such a way.
Beautiful person, Yeah, yeah, something else. So I put it out there in the world. Foghat would love to be Dolly's backup band on our next record.
Yeah.
We've even got a studio.
See? Roger, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and I want to be mindful of your time and not take up too much of your time, but I've loved hearing the background behind how everything got started and how everything came about.
Well, don't forget to promote this show that we're doing. It's all for a good cause. Hopefully we'll make lots of money.
We will. It's the Will Rock for Food annual presentation here in Marion this year, featuring Foghat on July 31st here at the Marion Cultural and Civic Center. We're so excited to have you coming.
Thank you, Josh. It's been a pleasure. Toad's going out. I've got to go and do something to the boat and lock it up, and probably get dinner going.
All right. It's been great talking to you. Thank you, Roger.
Same here, Josh. Pleasure.
You sit around and you think
Thank you for joining us for State of the Art Southern Illinois, a podcast by the Marion Cultural and Civic Center, focusing on artists, artisans, musicians, arts organizations, and events here in Southern Illinois, as well as national touring artists coming to the Marion Cultural and Civic Center, such as today's guest, Roger Earl of Foghat. Foghat will be here at the Marion Cultural and Civic Center on July 31st as part of the fundraiser Will Rock for Food that supports the Marion Ministerial Alliance. They provide an amazing service as a food pantry and soup kitchen here in Marion, Illinois. Special thanks to AJ Rice as our associate producer. Also, thank you to Jeremy Todd for today's soundtrack. Tickets for Foghat can be found on marioncccc.com. And now, for the entire track of It's in the End by Jeremy Todd.
You sit around and you think about terrible things, like how you will die, who's left you and why. It's leaving your heart with a sting. And all this worry and grief, it's starting to keep you from sleep. And this lack of sleep, well, keeps you from dreams and doing more purposeful things. So you accomplish nothing at all. Now that your life is a mess, your central nervous system's a wreck. The only ones who you'll name are those who you blame. Not 1 ounce of self-respect left. So you amount to nothing at all. So try and make the most while you can, 'cause in the end, it's all that matters. The thumbprint you leave on their heart sets you apart. most while you can, 'cause in the end, it's all that matters. The thumbprints you leave on their heart say it's you apart.